Hello everybody and welcome back to the next part of this series. The last time we left off at our UI pages. We set them up so we can click our buttons and change the pages. And now we're gonna fill them with the attributes bars. So that's the first set of widgets we're gonna create here. We just add another widget in here, make a right click, the interface widget, and this will be the attribute bar widget. We go in there. We again start with an image component and set that to a size like this. We can adjust those sizes later anytime. I want to give it a little bit of opacity. And inside that we want to have several things. We start with an item, with an icon widget, not an item icon widget, just with a normal icon, so we don't need to be able to click that. It's just for indicating what this attribute is about. The next thing we need is a progress bar to see how much we skilled this attribute and how scalable it still is. So we don't want this attribute to get skilled beyond all scales. We set a limit to that. So we have a bar in here and of course a button that allows us to upgrade this attribute then. Make it a bit like this. And on this button we want a text that tells us how much we're spending when we're upgrading this. Make it a bit smaller. And I always enter 888 if I want to allow for 3 digits in these kind of widgets. So to see visually how much space it takes. So we put it like this. Choose the font a little bit darker, but not all the way. So then we go to the outline settings. Give it a 1 pixel outline and the color just a little bit of a darker gray. Something like this. Can actually make it a little bit bigger like this. And I could have made a label here, a text label that says strength or accuracy or some other skill, but by choosing an icon here I can spare the text here, so that's one point less that I have then to localize if I want to translate this game and the UI into different languages. The more I can work with pictures, the less words I have to localize, so that cuts down a little bit of work on that department then. So now that we have set up our items, we're gonna name them a little bit proper. It's the icon. This progress bar will be the value bar. This button will be the upgrade button, and this will be the cost label, which tells us then what it costs. It's a variable, the same as the button, the bar and the icon. Let's save that. I'm not gonna bother about any changes in that bar appearance at the moment. We just keep it at the kind of default appearance, that blue bar. We can change that later on. So that is one of our widgets. Then we create the next one, which will be the attributes panel widget. Oh, sorry. The attributes array widget. My mistake. Getting ahead of myself again. This widget will contain a vertical box. And in this vertical box, you guessed it, we will drop our attribute bars. So we'll drop in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We can drop in more when we need. Let's put it in like this. And I like to have them also a little bit of spacing around. So we have it from the top, let's say 5, and 5 from the bottom. So it looks like this. Oh, and I also want them on the left side to have some padding. That looks pretty good. Now we give them again proper names. This is not the attribute bar widget, this is the health bar. We're also calling it here health bar. There's no danger of confusing it with the health bar in our stats bar, because that's a widget structure entirely different. So this is the stamina bar. What else do we need? We have a strength bar. We have an accuracy bar. Then we have maybe a dexterity bar, influencing how good we can move. Then we might have a metabolism bar, how good we process and utilize nutrients, just without the I. The next one we might have is a carry bar. We also want to increase how much we can carry. Then we might have a resilience bar, how much climate and temperature affects our character. And if we come up with more of them, we can easily add them to our structure here. And that's that for the attributes array widget. Normally we would go here again in the construction script and create some or make some changes to the icons for each bar. I'm not gonna do that now. I just leave them as they are. And we go to our next widget, which will be then the attributes panel widget. And this one we also start with a background image. Pull that out like so. So give it a little bit of opacity. And we put in our attributes array widget, position it like so. And to the bottom we add 2 text labels. About here one, and the next one right next to it. We set the first text to unspent points. And the second one, again, we just use that as a default. And we call it unspent label, and it's a variable. This is not, doesn't need to be. And I set the font color just a little bit into the gray. Like so. And again, this is just a first rough setup. We can rearrange and beautify all of that later. Again, changing the names here a little bit. So. Now we go to our attributes page and start by deleting this placeholder and now adding our attributes panel to it. Oop. And there already I see I would have to make this UI way bigger if I go with the initial sizes that I have for my widgets here. So if I hit play now and open up my menu system and go over to the attributes page, that list here is all over the place. And for the attributes page here, those icons, this bar and everything, it doesn't actually need to be that large. So I can scale it a little bit down. I go to the render transforms, I open them up and I choose for a scale, and we want to have a uniform scaling here, so to avoid any skewing. Let's say about 4.8. How far will get that us? Still a bit too big. 0.75. And as you can see, when we scale, the original pivot still counts it as if it were unscaled. So we're having our mouse pointer here a bit offset. And this looks nice. And if I can fiddle that in. So if we open up our inventory, our attributes page now, we have our stuff here. We cannot click on those icons, but they're not meant to be clicked. But we can click on our nicely button and everything has scaled down the way we want it. So that's that. So now we have all our widgets together that are necessary for the components. So we can now leave the widgets be widgets for a moment. That was the last widget we created in terms of of the initial UI. Now we can start thinking about our components, but we're not starting right away coding, clicking some graphs together. First, when we create our components, we give it a little thought. And the way I like to plan this, also when I do code projects, I do it this way. When I think about my class hierarchy, I'm using Excel. And at this point, I want to apologize already in advance for bothering you with a German Excel. It's just that it's just the way it is. We also gonna use Excel later when we create our item tables, our game database, and so on. And in its infinite wisdom, Microsoft decided to also localize the formula language in Excel, but I will always give you then the proper translation so you can do it in a English Excel version as well. Here we are just using it to have some text that we can drag around really comfortably. So we have components like health, stamina, then we have something like metabolism that will control the food and the water. So those two values go into the same component, while health and stamina, those components will have their own value. Then we have the accuracy, we have the dexterity, the resilience, and the carry. And did I miss some? Let me just check our attributes array widget for a moment. Health, stamina, strength, accuracy. That is good. We also have the XP component that will process how we progress in the game and then level up as necessary. So all these components, let's make them a little bit fat and make it a bit bigger. All these components will have different values and different properties. So a value, just like a number, that's something they all gonna have. We have an XP value, we have a carry value, like the maximum amount of weight we can carry. We have a resilience value that drives our reaction to temperatures. We have a dexterity value that could influence how we move. The accuracy value goes into the calculation then whether we are successful with a ranged weapon, and so on. Metabolism, a better value here could mean we process food better, we need to drink less. And the stamina and the health, that's self-explanatory. So all components will have that. What do components else have? And I like to view that as some kind of a shopping list where I put for every component in something that I want the component to have. For example, the health and stamina bar, they are both having a widget visible in the stats bar up there. So I just say stats, that's something they have. The metabolism also has that. Accuracy does not, neither does dexterity. Resilience, it does. It has the temperature, or we could make temperature an own component. I haven't decided on that. So for now we just leave it as if we would have it in the resilience component. The carry component, yep, that has a stats display. This will be then tied up to the inventory component, which will come at a later point. We won't list it up here. The XP component, yep, it has a stats display. And some components have that attributes bar. The health bar has it, the stamina bar has it, the metabolism, and all the other bars except for the XP, because XP is not something that we could skill or put somewhere. So what else do we need? We have some components that are doing basically nothing until we modify or retrieve a value from it, like dexterity or accuracy. And we have some components that will do things on their own, so to speak, that is on tick. And those components are, for example, the health component. So when we are injured and our character recovers, that will be done on tick. Same goes for the stamina recovery and also for the metabolism. And in addition to that, also our XP component will tick, because we're gaining XP while just being in the game. And that looks pretty good. And we should also put the temperature in its own category now. So resolving the conundrum from before, whether it should have one or not, because also the temperature component will be updated periodically depending on where we are, what we do. So resilience does not have it, but this has the stats display. So when we have that, we just group them together the way they stack in terms of what they inherit or what they share and whatnot. So let's do that real quick. Then we have this one here. Let's put them in order like this. And we can already see that it's probably good to have this one stemming off the same base component and basically having something that implements this, and we can see what we can share from among these components. I make a little snapshot of that for future reference, and we can now start implementing our first component. It will be the value, because that's shared by all of them. That's kind of trivial. So we go to the content folder, to our main folder, and we create another subfolder we call components. And inside this folder we create a subfolder, we call it basic, because that will be our basic components, where all other components will build up from. We choose new blueprint class, and we choose actor component as a base class. And we just call it value comp, because it will have a value. That's what all components have, at least a value. We open that up and we add some variables to it. 3 floats to be exact. and we call the first one high bound, because I want in those ranges, those values to be ranged. And is then the value. And this one will then of course be the low bound. Let's compile that and give the high bound a default value of 100. That's nice. And we can already put some functions in there. For example, get percentage. This will be useful when we fill our widgets with our percentage values, and that's what the function will give us. We take the high bound, subtract from it the low bound. We already assume here that the numeric value of the high bound will always be higher than the numeric value of the low bound. And we take our value, we divide that, and we get our function, provide an output, percentage, call it percentage, make it a float, connect it up, and that's our first function for our first component that we have. We're not doing anything here in the graph for this component. We have this value here, and we close that out. The next component will be inheriting from that, so we make a right click on it, say create child blueprint class, and this will be the leveled value component. So this will be a component that has a value but can also be leveled. It has additional variables for that, while the value comp does not. So this would be then kind of an ancestor for the XP component, since it does not need to be leveled, it cannot level, and the other components might then come from there, since they can be leveled. So we go in there, and if we expand that eye icon here and click on show inherited variables, we can already see them here. They're not in a group because we didn't group them, but that's okay for here. We can leave them as is. So for our leveled value component, we add some levels. That would be some variables. That would be, for example, the level itself, which is integer. We start with level 0, that's okay. And of course we also need a level max. What is the maximum for that? We might set that to the same maximum level for all our attributes or individually. We have complete freedom of choice if we store that maximum attribute level for each attribute separately. Let's make it a default of 10. So then we add another function before we name that correctly. So now we add some more functions to that, but first we create yet another variable, also an integer. We call it costs, and that is how much it takes us to upgrade it one level. It costs 1 unit by default. Of course that will game typically increase with growing levels, but we're setting those data tables up later. Now we're just adding some more functions, like the get percentage function from our ancestor component, which we could override here, but we don't. Instead, we create a new one, and it's called get level ratio. It does basically the same thing, just for the level and the level max, and that value will be used to drive our attributes bar value position. So this one outputs a ratio as a float, and we get the level max, and we get the level. And now it would be kind of simple if we would just divide that by that and connect that up, let Unreal do the conversion. But this division is a division that like kind of drops the remainder. The result is still an integer, and for if we have then higher level max and not really even values here, we wouldn't get a really good result for that. So we have to use a float division. And that means we go for float by float and make the conversion here at this point. So now we're dividing two floats and getting a float back, and that will be then precise. Let's put that neatly together. So that's our get level ratio function. We close that out. And as one of the last things we're gonna today in this episode, we go back into our original value component and do something with our high and low bound, so that we didn't put them in there for nothing. We add another function. We call it update value, because I don't want to call it set value, not to confuse it with the intrinsic set value function that the engine provides for this variable. We call it update value. Of course, it has an input. Which call new value. It's a float. And we get that. Sooner or later we need our bound values, so we get them here, that we have them as well. So first we add them both together. New value float plus float. And we check that first against the high bound value. So if that value is greater than the high bound, and we branch for that, in this case we want to set the value to our high bound. So we can never exceed our high bound value with updating the value. So now we do the same in the false branch for the low bound condition. So we check if our new value, oh, by the way, of course we need to set that first, otherwise we have to do that calculation all over again. So we just disconnect that from here. reconnect that here. So first we update our value as if there were no high bound, and then we connect our set value against the high bound, and if it is bigger than the high bound, then we set it to the high bound. That's the way. And if we get our value, which has been set, if that is less or equal in this case, there's a reason I don't use the equal here. I explain that in a moment when it becomes apparent what we else do with these calculations, with these results. So if this value is lower or equal to our low bound, then we branch off of that. And if that is true, then we set our value to the low bound. If the value is basically in between, we would end out here. We have nothing there yet. That comes basically now. So when I update a value or any from outside or within this component, I also care about whether or not I hit the upper or lower bound limits. So for that reason, we create in our components folder yet another subfolder and call it again data types, just we did in the as we did for the UMG pages. Here we also create an enum, and we call it value bounds results. If I can type properly, this will hold 3 values. It will be high bound, which means our attempt to modify the value will make it hit the upper bounds. Then we have inbounds if our modification is okay, and we have low bound if we hit the lower bound. Consequently, our update value function will now have an output of the type value bounds results. So here we connect it to high bound. That's good. We duplicate it and we connect it to this one, set it to low bounds and copy it again. And this is the node that goes finally to our false here, and that's the result to inbounds. And this becomes useful when we say we apply damage to our character, or he receives damage, and we want to reduce the health a little bit. Then we do that, and based on the result we can react. So any modification that would return low bounds for the health component, for example, would mean that the character dies because the health has reached 0 or the lower bound that we set up for the component. On the other hand, while the character sprints, he consumes stamina, and when the stamina reaches 0, it would make the character stop sprinting, and in both cases of stamina and health, if they are not full to the max, they recover as the character regenerates over time, and when that hits the upper bound, we can also tell the component that it has finished recovering. So we don't have to tick the component the whole time. Only when the character receives damage, the component will then start ticking and regenerating the character until the health is fully restored. It will then stop ticking, and the same thing for the stamina component. It will only tick while in sprinting and reducing the stamina, and only tick when non-sprinting if the stamina is not fully recovered. The hunger and thirst components, the metabolism component, that of course will tick constantly, as over time the player will be constantly consuming nutrients. But that's for this function. We save that and close that out. And that's pretty much for today's episode. We finished up our widgets. We created our first basic component elements. And the next time we will expand on that, can create components that have widget references and other functionality as well, and then start making the individual components that then will go into the player character. And once that is done, we can connect it all together and see on the screen what we have. So this was the main reason why we spent so much time on creating the UI elements first. So now when we have our component and work with our level values and health values and whatnot, we have something here on the screen that we could easily verify. So that was that for this episode. I hope you liked it. See you next time.